At my wife's funeral, my own son pulled me aside and whispered coldly, "We're stopping your help. Now you're on your own." Christine didn't even look up from her phone. That Sunday, I walked out with one bag, and when they came home, I was gone. 123 missed calls later, they finally understood. The house, the trust, everything had always been mine. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Ray Wallace. I'm 68, and I've lived in Fresno my whole adult life. The Central Valley, where April smells like almond blossoms and road dust, not the ocean. 31 years with Cal Fire before my knees, and my supervisor both told me it was time. I get my Cal PERS check on the 1st of every month. I rent out a small commercial unit over in Clovis, and I spend my mornings in the garage turning wood on a lathe. Bowls, candle holders, frames, nothing fancy. Just things that take patience to make right. I thought I understood patience. My son Eric is 39. He works logistics management for a company out near the airport. Coordinates shipments, tracks numbers, talks about optimizing workflows at dinner, like the rest of us know what that means. Before he married Christine in the fall of 2016, he used to call me on Sundays. Not for anything specific, just to talk. We'd drive out to Millerton Lake sometimes, sit on the tailgate of my truck, say maybe 40 words total, and that was enough. I didn't think about those drives much back then. I think about them constantly now. Christine is 36. If she's smart, I'll give her that. The kind of smart that's always measuring the room. She noticed within the first 6 months of living in my house on Thesta Street exactly which opinions I'd hold and which I'd let go. She filed that information away and used it like a tool. Things shifted slowly, the way a foundation settles. You don't notice the cracks until a door stops closing right. In the summer of 2019, Christine had their second baby, needed to recover, which I fully understood. What I understood less was 5 months of watching both kids while she attended yoga classes, lunches, and what Eric vaguely called her time. I'm not counting, except I am, because nobody ever said thank you, not once. I'm not a man who needs a parade, but a single word would have been legit. Eric did manage a "you're a lifesaver, Dad" once in September, in a tone he uses when he's already moving toward the door. 2 years later, fall 2021, the roof on the house started going. I got 3 estimates. The lowest came in at $18,400. I wrote the check. The house on Thesta Street has my name on the deed from 1991, back when I bought it for $138,000 on an FHA loan, and thought I was the luckiest man in the Central Valley. Eric had been living there with his family for 4 years by then, paying reduced rent that somehow kept getting reduced further till it was just nothing. Utilities shared. We're family, Dad. Sure, the $9,000 loan in 2023 I won't belabor. He paid back $3,000, told me the rest was tied up in something. I nodded. By then, I had learned that nodding was faster than the alternative. The funeral for my wife, Linda, was a Thursday. The chapel out on Shields Avenue, the same one her parents used. About 60 people, most of them older than me. The almond trees outside had already dropped their blossoms. The petals were dried and brown on the asphalt. I noticed that because I needed something to look at besides the faces. Afterward, in the parking lot, while people were still holding paper cups of bad coffee, Eric touched my arm and steered me about 15 feet from the group. His voice was low, measured, like he'd been practicing. "Dad, me and Christine, we've been talking." He paused to let that land. "You've been doing so much for so long. We think it's time for you to, live for yourself. You don't have to take on all of it anymore." I looked past him at Christine. She was standing near the car, phone in hand, thumb moving across the screen. She didn't look up, not once. I looked back at Eric. He had the expression of a man who has convinced himself he's doing something kind. The parking lot was quiet except for pigeons and distant traffic on Shaw Avenue. I stood there for maybe 4 seconds, which is a long time when someone's waiting to see if you'll crumble. Then I said one sentence. Eric went very still. I walked to my truck, got in, and drove home. 7 days later, a Sunday, Eric and Christine loaded the kids into their SUV and drove down to Malaga for her parents' birthday party. I watched them back out of the driveway from the kitchen window. The kids waved. I waved back. Then I went to the garage. I want to tell you what that garage looked like because it matters. A converted two-car space, maybe 480 square feet. My Powermatic 352 OC lathe along the left wall, bought it in 2009, and it still runs like the day I brought it home. Shelves of maple blanks, cherry rounds, a few pieces of black walnut I'd been saving for something worth making. The smell in there is sawdust and linseed oil, and if you've never worked with your hands for 30 years, you might not understand why a person would stand in a room like that and feel more like themselves than anywhere else on earth. Christine had mentioned twice in the past year that the garage would make a great open courtyard if you pulled out all the equipment. She used air quotes with her fingers. She was talking about my lathe. I took the turning tools I cared about most, a set of Henry Taylor gouges, a couple of custom scrapers, rolled them in canvas, and set them in the bottom of the duffel bag. Then I added the documents, original deed from 1991, the living trust Linda and I had drawn up in 2008, my passport, CalPERS benefit statements, 3 years of bank records. Everything that had my name on it, everything that was, legally and factually, mine. Working clothes, chargers, a jacket. I did not take the framed photo on the dresser. I did not take the wooden bowl I'd made Linda for her 60th birthday. The one still sitting on the kitchen windowsill with a crack running through it from when it got knocked over in 2022, and Eric set it back without saying anything. I left it there. At 9:15, I was in the truck. At 9:47, I was pulling into the parking lot of a one-bedroom apartment in Tower District I'd leased 10 days earlier. First and last month up front, $2,760. The building's older, the windows face west, and there's a coffee place half a block down. I'd signed the lease on a Tuesday, and the week between the funeral and the Sunday during a window when Erica was at work and Christine was at the gym. That's the part people misunderstand about quiet men. They think quiet means slow. I'd been watching Eric for a while, not obsessively, just the way you watch weather when you live in fire country. You read the conditions. You notice what's dry. In February, 2 months before Linda passed, I'd found a name in his browser history on the shared home computer. Karen Flores, an attorney in Fresno who handles contested trust cases. I saw it for about 3 seconds before the screen locked. That was enough. Eric had started planning before his mother was in the ground. I sat with that knowledge a while. The way you sit with a bad medical result before you decide what to do about it. Not anger, exactly. More like a door closing, a soft click, nothing dramatic. Eric and Christine got home at 5:30. I know the timing because the first call came in at 5:42 p.m. I was unpacking in Tower District, sorting the turning tools onto the kitchen counter because I didn't have a garage yet. By midnight, 38 missed calls. By the following evening, 123. I watched the number climb the way you watch a fuel gauge drop on the 99. Steady, predictable. I didn't answer any of them, not because I was punishing anyone, because there was nothing to say yet, and I've never talked when I have nothing to say. On the kitchen table, next to the deed and the trust documents, I'd set the one piece of paper I hadn't fully processed until now. A printout I'd made of that browser search. The date stamp in the corner read February 11th, 6 weeks before Linda died. I read it again. Then I opened the folder with the trust documents and looked at the beneficiary page. Eric Wallace, his children. I set the paper down flat. Outside, the Tower District was doing its usual Sunday evening thing. Someone playing guitar 2 floors up, the smell of food from the taqueria on the corner, the last light going amber over the rooftops. I picked up my phone. Not to answer a call, to find the number for a real estate attorney named Diego Romero, whose card had been sitting in my wallet since a CalPERS information seminar 8 months ago. His office opened Monday at 9. I had the documents ready. 2 mornings after I left the house on Thesta Street, I drove up Fulton Street and found a parking spot half a block from the address I'd written on a notepad. Suite 310, a mid-rise building with a directory in the lobby and a slow elevator that smelled like carpet cleaner. Diego Romero's office was at the end of a corridor, frosted glass door, a nameplate in clean block letters, a receptionist who asked me to take a seat without looking up from her monitor. I sat. There was a ficus in the corner that was doing better than most houseplants I've known. I counted ceiling tiles. I've waited in worse places, staging areas, hospital lobbies, the Cal Fire District office in Fresno on the morning after a bad shift. Waiting doesn't bother me. I've had a lot of practice. Romero came out at 9:15 on the dot. 51, maybe 52, with the kind of calm you develop from spending years in rooms where people argue about property. Gray at the temples. He shook my hand once firmly, then said, "Come in." I laid the documents on his desk in the order I'd organized them the night before. Original deed, 1991. Raymond T. Wallace, sole owner. The living trust Linda and I had drawn up in 2008, with Eric listed as primary beneficiary, and his children named after him. The mortgage payoff record from 2017, 3 years of tax statements showing the Prop 13 assessment, $1,740 annually. Paid every November without exception, Romero read. He didn't skim. He actually read, turning pages carefully, occasionally making a mark with a pencil in the margin of his notepad. I respected that. I've dealt with professionals who perform thoroughness. He wasn't performing. He looked up after about 12 minutes. "You're the sole surviving trustee," he said. "After your wife passed, full control of the trust transferred to you by operation of law. Eric is a beneficiary, him and his children." A pause. "But beneficiaries don't control the trustee does." "Which is me. Which is you." He set the deed flat on the desk. "You can amend the trust. You can replace it entirely. You can change the beneficiaries to whoever you choose." He said it the way a contractor tells you the load-bearing wall can be moved. Technically true, practically significant, emotionally neutral. "This is your legal right as trustee." I asked him what it would cost and how long it would take. He laid out 2 options. A trust amendment at $1,200, turnaround 10 to 14 business days, or a full trust restatement at $2,800 up to 3 weeks. The difference, he explained, was one of clarity. An amendment layers on top of the original document. A full restatement replaces it cleanly, leaving nothing to interpret. I told him I wanted the full restatement. He nodded like that was the answer he expected. Then I asked him about a private investigator. I explained what I needed, not surveillance, nothing dramatic. Just confirmation that Eric had already taken steps regarding the property. Whether he'd consulted anyone, whether anything had been filed or attempted. Romero wrote a name on the back of a business card. Terry Bennett, Kern Street. "He's accurate," Romero said. "Not good, not reliable." Accurate. I filed that away. I was pulling on my jacket to leave when Romero stopped me with one sentence. "Mr. Wallace, you may already have what you need. I can confirm that an attorney named Karen Flores, who handles contested trust matters here in Fresno, logged a client consultation in February. The name on the intake record was Eric Wallace. February. 2 months before Linda passed. I stood there for a moment. Romero was watching me with the specific neutrality of a man who has seen this expression on a lot of faces. "He hasn't filed anything," Romero added. "Yet." "Thank you," I said. I walked down the corridor, waited for the slow elevator, and stepped out into the parking lot. Eric's car was parked 3 spaces from mine, a gray Camry 2022. Christine picked it out. He was sitting in the driver's seat with his hands on the wheel, looking directly at me. I walked toward his car at the same pace I'd walk anywhere. He watched me cross the lot and didn't move. The window came down when I was 6 feet away. "Dad?" He said it like it was a question and a statement at once. "Can we talk?" "I'm listening." He talked. He went on for a while, about how the timing at the funeral had been wrong, about how Christine didn't mean it the way it sounded, about how the kids were asking about me and didn't understand why I wasn't at the house anymore. He used the word misunderstanding 3 times. He did not, at any point in that conversation, use the word sorry. I let him finish. When he stopped, the silence stretched out for a few seconds. "Eric," I said, "are you trying to have a conversation, or are you trying to find out where I'm living?" He opened his mouth, closed it. "All right," I said, "take care of yourself." I got in my truck and drove back to Tower District. The following week, I went to see Terry Bennett. His office on Kern Street was smaller than Romero's. One room, a desk, 2 chairs, filing cabinet, a window that faced a brick wall. He was 58, built like someone who'd spent a long time on patrol. And he had the specific economy of motion that comes from years of watching people without being noticed. He didn't offer coffee. I appreciated the efficiency. I gave him 2 tasks. First, confirm that Eric had, in fact, consulted Karen Flores in February and determine what he'd asked about. Second, find out whether Eric had made any moves since then. Requests for documents, contact with county offices, anything touching the property on Thesta Street. Retainer's $1,500, Bennett said. I'll cap the work at $4,000 total, unless you tell me otherwise. $4,000 is the ceiling, I said. Understood. I paid the retainer in check, we shook hands, and I was back on Kern Street in under 20 minutes. That's the kind of meeting I like. 3 days later, I drove over to North First Street to see Brenda Hunt. She had a small independent office above a dry cleaner, nothing fancy, which I took as a good sign. 54, capable handshake, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She'd been recommended by 2 neighbors on Thesta Street who'd sold within the last 4 years. I'd confirmed both recommendations independently before calling her. I told her I needed a current market valuation on the property at $2,847 North Thesta Street. Official, documented, accurate. She pulled up comparable sales while I watched. 31 minutes later, she set a number on the desk. $612,000, with a note that it could push to $630,000 if the garage were converted to open outdoor space. Garage stays, I said. She looked at me for half a second, then wrote something on her pad. She didn't ask why. Smart woman. 4 days after I met with Bennett, he called me. He'd confirmed the February consultation with Flores. Eric had asked her about beneficiary rights and trustee oversight. Standard language for someone who wants to know how much power a beneficiary has versus the person running the trust. The answer Flores would have told him was not much. Bennett had also confirmed that Eric had attempted to obtain a copy of the trust document through Flores's office using her letterhead. The county recorder's office had declined the request. As sole living trustee, I hadn't authorized any release, and there was no court order compelling one. Eric had tried to get the map without asking the map maker. I was sitting at my kitchen table in Tower District with a cup of coffee going cold when a plain envelope arrived in my mailbox downstairs. No return address. Inside, a single folded sheet, handwritten 3 short paragraphs. Christine's signature at the bottom. She wanted to meet. Just the 2 of them, no lawyers, no tension, a coffee shop of my choosing. She had some thoughts she'd like to share. I read it twice, then I set it on the table next to the deed. Christine had never, in 9 years of knowing me, initiated a direct conversation about anything that didn't benefit Christine. I picked up the phone and texted her one word. Tuesday. Tuesday morning, review coffee on North Van Ness, a few blocks from my apartment. I got there at 9. Christine was already at a corner table. She'd arrived early, which told me something. She'd ordered a latte, arranged her jacket neatly over the back of the chair, and was sitting with her hands folded on the table when I walked in. She looked like a woman who had rehearsed being relaxed and had mostly pulled it off. I ordered a dripped coffee at the counter and sat down across from her. Ray. She smiled like we were 2 old friends catching up after a normal week. Thank you for coming. You asked, I said. She started with the kids. Both doing well, the older one asking about me, the younger one drawing pictures at kindergarten. She described this with the careful warmth of someone reading from a script they'd approved the night before. Specific details. The older one's soccer game last Saturday, the younger one's teacher, a phrase one of them had said at dinner that was apparently very funny. I noticed she used the word home twice in the first 2 minutes, not as a place, but as a concept. Something worth protecting, a value to invoke. I drank my coffee and let her get through it. She was good at this. I'd watched her work a room at Eric's company holiday party in 2022, moving from group to group, adjusting her register with each person, calibrating warmth to whatever frequency each one responded to. Today she was running the same routine on an audience of 1, which should have been easier, except the audience had seen the routine before. Then she moved to the part she'd actually come for. "We all want things to go back to normal," she said. Her voice had shifted, softer, more careful. "The house, the routine, it's been hard on everyone, especially the kids." A pause, perfectly timed. "You're not planning to do anything drastic with the property, are you? That house is where they grew up. It's our home, Ray." I set my cup down, looked at her for a few seconds. She held the smile, but her eyes were doing something else entirely, measuring, recalculating, running scenarios. "Christine," I said, "do you know the difference between our home and a home where you live?" The smile didn't disappear. It just stopped meaning anything. She looked at me the way you look at a door you thought was unlocked that turns out not to be. I watched her process the sentence. I watched her decide not to answer it. We sat for another 4 minutes, making the kind of conversation that isn't really conversation. She asked about my health. I said fine. She mentioned the valley heat had come in early this year. I agreed. When she left, she touched my arm once at the door and said she hoped we could keep talking. "I'll be in touch," I said. Standing on Van Ness, watching her car pull out into traffic, I ran through what the meeting had been. She came for a read on where I stood. She left with one sentence that told her nothing useful. That was the whole point. She'd arrived expecting either compliance or confrontation. I gave her neither, and that was the one response she hadn't prepared for. Back inside, I finished my coffee. 2 men at the counter were arguing about the Kings. The barista was rewrapping a pastry display. Normal Tuesday in Tower District. That quiet lasted until the following morning when Romero called before 9. "Eric filed a petition through Karen Flores," he said. "Beneficiary access to trust documents under California probate code. As a named beneficiary, he's entitled to a trust accounting." What does that give him? A summary, not the full restatement. That's still processing. But Flores will see from the accounting that changes are underway. A brief pause. "There's a secondary problem. The notary who certified the new trust document received a courtesy notice about the filing and suspended the recording. Not a court order. He's being cautious. But if Eric's attorney escalates to a formal injunction within 10 days, a judge could freeze the recording until there's a ruling." 10 days. If you appear personally at the recorder's office and confirm your intent and competency in front of their notary, the hesitation dissolves. The document records the same day. I was already looking for my keys. I was at the Fresno County Recorder's office the following morning at 8:45, 15 minutes before they unlocked the front door. The Central Valley was already pushing 85 degrees by 9 a.m., May heat arriving early. The notary on duty was a woman named Patricia who processed documents with the quiet efficiency of someone who has never once been surprised by paperwork. I laid out the trust restatement, my photo ID, and a letter from my physician dated 3 weeks prior. Annual checkup, clean bill of health, full cognitive function, signed and stamped. She read what was in front of her, asked me 3 standard competency questions, and notarized my statement of intent in under 7 minutes. Recording fee, $35. I paid cash. The full trust restatement recorded at 11:02 that morning. New beneficiaries, the Cal Fire Benevolent Fund, 60%. My brother Harry Wallace, 40%. Eric Wallace and his family, removed entirely, as completely as a name gets removed from a legal document in the state of California. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for a minute after. The document was now public record, time-stamped, filed before Karen Flores had finished processing Eric's beneficiary access petition. Whatever move they'd planned, they'd needed to make it before 11:02. They hadn't. Romero confirmed the recording number that afternoon. Then Bennett's report came in. Terry Bennett had been watching Thesta Street. In the days since Christine's letter, both she and Eric had stopped to talk with 3 different neighbors on the block. Not casual, structured. 2 of the neighbors had been asked whether they'd noticed anything concerning about my behavior in recent months, whether I seemed confused, whether I'd been acting differently. Contested trust, step 1, establish the trustee's decline. Get neighbors saying the man seemed off, give a judge a reason to look twice. It was the right strategy for their situation. The only real path left once the deed challenge was off the table and the beneficiary petition had already run behind schedule. I brought 3 years of medical records to Romero the next morning. Routine physicals, a knee follow-up from a 2023 hiking trip near Shaver Lake, one dental cleaning, nothing touching cognition or capacity. Romero set the folder flat on his desk. Their incompetency claim falls apart at the first hearing, he said. Clean medical records, independent legal counsel, original property documents correctly identified and produced, full trust restatement with notarized intent. A judge dismisses that before lunch. Good. One more angle they might try. He set his pen down. Not the trust, not incompetency, the deed itself. The 1991 property deed. If Flores argues Linda held an undisclosed equitable interest under California community property law, they could petition to have the deed reconsidered. Did she have that interest? Romero opened the folder and turned it so I could see the first page. The original deed from October 1991. One name on the ownership line, Raymond T. Wallace. The 2008 trust named her as co-trustee, he said, not co-owner of the underlying property. If they file on the deed, we respond with the full mortgage payment history and the fact that no co-ownership claim was ever filed during her lifetime. Under California law, that case is very weak. How weak? Weak enough that a competent attorney would advise strongly against it. He closed the folder. Karen Flores is competent, Romero called once more that evening. One scenario to flag, he said. They could abandon the trust challenge and pivot, file directly against the 1991 deed on community property grounds. Slower, more expensive for everyone. A pause. Is there anything about the original financing I should know? Anything outside the standard mortgage record? I thought through it. The FHA loan, the closing in Bakersfield, every payment from 1991 to 2017. Nothing, I said. Then we're solid. I set the phone on the table. The trust was recorded. The deed was clean. The incompetency play had no medical basis. Eric and Christine were somewhere across Fresno, sitting with their attorney, looking at options that had just gotten considerably smaller. The deed question turned out to be short. Romero pulled the original document from October 1991 and set it flat on the desk between us. One ownership line, one name, Raymond T. Wallace, no other party listed, no joint tenancy, no community property designation, the kind of clean document a first-time buyer gets when the loan officer is processing 8 other files the same afternoon and nobody's thinking about what happens 3 decades later. Your wife was named co-trustee in the 2008 trust restatement, Romero said. That's a fiduciary role. She could manage the property on behalf of the trust, but she was never listed as a property owner on the underlying deed. Those are legally distinct positions. He tapped the page. For Eric's attorney to challenge this, she'd need to argue undisclosed equitable interest, that Linda's contribution to the household implied co-ownership. Under California community property law, that argument can be made, but it requires evidence of her direct financial contribution to the mortgage specifically, and a credible explanation for why no claim was ever filed during her lifetime. She knew the deed was mine, I said. The paper agrees with you. I drove back thinking about the Bakersfield closing in 1991, the lawyer's office on Chester Avenue, the stack of papers, Linda sitting next to me with her reading glasses on, nodding at the explanation. She'd understood then, the same thing Romero was confirming now. The house was in my name because that's how the FHA loan worked, and neither of us had ever thought it would matter until a different set of people decided it might. 2 days later, Bennett sent his next report. Eric and Christine had filed a request with the city of Fresno to change the utility account holder for the property on Thesta Street. Water, gas, electricity, all 3. They'd listed themselves as the new account holders and attached a letter from Flores' office describing them as occupants managing the property. The city's billing department had declined the transfer. Reason on record, the deed showed a different owner and no authorization from that owner was present. They'd tried to plant a flag. The ground didn't take it. I made one phone call that afternoon to the homeowner's insurance carrier I'd used for 22 years. I explained that I was the sole owner of the property at 2847 North Thesta Street, that I no longer resided there, and that the current occupants had no ownership interest. The agent walked me through the policy adjustment. Under the revised terms, the property was covered as a non-owner occupied dwelling. The occupants had no claim against the policy. If something happened while they were living there, a kitchen fire, a burst pipe, they'd be uninsured. I didn't call Eric to tell him. He'd find out when he needed to. That's a category of information I was happy to let him discover on his own timetable. 3 days passed, then Brenda Hunt called. Brenda was the real estate agent I'd hired for the appraisal, the one who'd valued the property at $612,000 and accepted without comment that the garage wasn't going anywhere. Someone called my office yesterday, she said, identified themselves as part of the Wallace family, wanted a listing consultation for the Thesta Street property. I pulled it up, saw your name on the ownership record, and told them I wasn't available. Did they leave a name? First name only, Christine. I thanked her and ended the call. The incompetency claim had no medical foundation. The deed challenge required evidence that didn't exist. The utility transfer had been declined, and now Christine was calling real estate agents trying to list a house she didn't own. I stood at my kitchen window in Tower District, watching the late afternoon light move across the street below. A man was walking a dog. 2 kids were arguing over a bike. The valley in late May, going about its business. Christine, calling Brenda Hunt, told me she was out of moves that worked through the front door. People who run out of front door options don't usually stop. They start looking for side entrances. I'd spent 31 years with CAL FIRE. I knew what it looked like when something was trying to find a way around a barrier. I called Romero first thing the following morning. If they find an agent willing to list the property anyway, what happens? Nothing that closes, he said. Any legitimate sale requires clear title. No title company will issue a policy on a property with a contested deed or active trust. Without title insurance, no lender funds the purchase. Without a lender, there's no escrow. No escrow, no sale. A pause. The risk is a cash buyer, a transaction structured to avoid standard title review. Not common, but it exists. How do I close that door? Go in person to the major brokerages. Leave a written statement on file. I spent that afternoon at 3 offices, 2 regional brokerages on North First Street, and Blackstone, one larger firm near Shaw and Marks. At each one, I spoke to the managing broker and left a 1-page written statement. The property at 2847 North Thesta Street was held in a recorded trust. The sole trustee was Raymond T. Wallace, and any listing or sale attempted without the trustee's signed authorization was unauthorized and subject to legal action. At the 3rd office, the managing broker, a woman in her mid-50s, who had the settled manner of someone who had processed several thousand transactions without once being surprised, looked at my statement and said, "Someone already called us 2 days ago asking about that address. What did you tell them?" "That we'd need the owner of record to authorize the listing. They said they'd call back." She set the paper on her desk. They didn't. Bennett's check-in came in that evening. A text with a follow-up note. Send and file. 6 photographs time-stamped. A man I didn't recognize. 50s, heavy build, jeans and a gray T-shirt. Meeting Christine in the parking structure at Fashion Fair Mall on Palm Avenue mid-afternoon 2 days earlier. Bennett had shot from 2 levels up. Arrival, handshake, a folder, changing hands, departure. Clean documentation. Bennett's note. Same individual observed at 2847 North Thesta Street on June 14th and June 19th. Arrived in white panel van, no markings. The man wasn't a lawyer. Bennett had confirmed he wasn't connected to any law firm in the county. He drove a white panel van and had been to the house twice in 10 days. I called Romero. A white van, no markings, visiting the property twice, then meeting Christine at a mall after a large cash withdrawal, Romero said slowly. What did you leave in the house? I ran through it, the furniture, the appliances, refrigerator, washer, dryer, the chest freezer in the garage, the flat screen in the living room, Linda's antique writing desk in the 2nd bedroom. Most of it was itemized on the homeowner's insurance policy under my name. Replacement value somewhere north of $22,000 for the major items alone. They're liquidating the contents, I said. That's my read, Romero said. They can't sell the property. So they're converting what they can reach, the physical assets inside the house. Cash transaction, no paper trail, move it before you notice. Christine's $14,200 withdrawal was probably front money to the buyer, repaid from sale proceeds once items cleared. A workaround, not elegant, but not nothing either. Can we stop it? We document it and we move fast, Romero said. Bennett's photographs establish the relationship. Your insurance inventory establishes what's inside and in whose name. If items disappear, we have the civil claim ready. Unauthorized removal of property listed under your name, that's conversion under California law. Civil suit, damages, attorney's fees. I set the phone down on the kitchen table, sat with it for a moment. 2 months of silence, and this was where it had landed. A white van in the driveway and a man meeting my daughter-in-law in a parking garage. I picked the phone back up and scrolled to a number I hadn't dialed since the parking lot outside Romero's office. 2 months of missed calls going the other direction. Now it was my turn. It rang 4 times. Dad, Eric, I said, stop. The call lasted 11 minutes. Eric picked up on the 4th ring. His voice was careful, prepared, or trying to be. Dad, Eric, I said, stop. A pause. What? The cash withdrawal, the man with the van, the calls to the real estate offices. I kept my voice level, the way you talk in a burning structure when the important thing is that everyone hears you clearly. I know about all of it. I've had documentation on every move for the past 3 weeks. Silence on his end. I could hear something in the background. A television maybe, or one of the kids in another room. You're living in my house, I said, not your house. My house. That's been true since October 1991, and it didn't change when you moved in. And it didn't change when your attorney filed that petition, and it didn't change when Christine called Brenda Hunt. Go look up the recording at the Fresno County Recorder's Office. The trust restatement has been on file since May. Read who the beneficiaries are now. You can't just... I can, I said. I already did. You have 30 days. I ended the call. The following morning, Romero had the notice to quit ready. 30 days. Pursuant to California Civil Code Section 1946. Addressed to Eric Wallace and Christine Wallace. Occupants of 2847 North Thesta Street, Fresno. I signed it. A process server delivered it to the front door at 10:15 that morning. Christine called 3 times over the next 2 days. I let the first 2 go. On the 3rd, I picked up. Ray, her voice was different, not the careful warmth of the coffee shop, not the calculated softness she used when she wanted something harder. You're destroying this family. No, I said. I'm taking back what's mine. There's a difference. She said something else, something about the kids, about the disruption, about how I was being unreasonable. I listened until she finished. Christine, I said, you had 9 years. You could have said thank you once. I set the phone down. Romero filed the civil complaint the same week. Unauthorized removal and attempted conversion of personal property itemized under the homeowner's insurance policy, the appliances, the furniture, Linda's writing desk. The claim totaled $14,200, matching the cash withdrawal exactly, plus attorney's fees and court costs. Not a criminal filing, a civil one. Clean, documented, and entirely provable with Bennett's photographs and the insurance inventory. Karen Flores filed a response within 10 days disputing the characterization of the items as the owner's property. Romero sent her the insurance policy with the itemized list, each piece listed under Raymond T. Wallace. Replacement values noted. Her response to that took 4 days. The 30 days on the notice to quit ran out on a Tuesday. I drove to Thesta Street that afternoon and parked in front for a moment before getting out. The lawn needed cutting. The almond tree was dropping its early summer pods on the sidewalk, same as it had every June since I planted it in 1997. The front door was locked. I used my key. The house was empty. Furniture gone. Appliances gone. The flat screen pulled from the wall. The bracket still there. The shadow of it visible on the paint. Linda's writing desk was gone from the second bedroom. Closets open and cleared. The refrigerator gone from the kitchen, a clean square on the linoleum where it had stood for 14 years. They'd taken everything they could carry. I walked through each room without hurrying. The ceilings I'd painted, the floors I'd laid, the window in the dining room I'd reframed after a 2015 rainstorm warped the original sill. The house was still structurally what it had always been. They'd taken the contents, but they couldn't take what held it up. I went out to the garage last. One of the small windows on the side wall had been broken. A single pane punched through from outside, glass on the floor. The Powermatic lathe was exactly where it had always been. The shelving along the far wall had been cleared of most of the lumber blanks, but the maple rounds I'd kept in the metal cabinet were untouched. The cabinet locked, and apparently nobody had thought to bring bolt cutters. I stood in the middle of the garage and looked at the lathe. Then I looked at the broken window. A fist through a pane of glass was the most they could do to this room. I almost felt bad about how small that was. Almost. Several weeks later, after the lawyers had finished trading paper, Romero called to tell me the civil case had settled. Eric and Christine had agreed to pay $9,800, not the full $14,200. Romero had accepted the reduction because Eric had returned a portion of the money directly, and a contested civil trial over furniture would cost more to pursue than to settle. $9,800. I told Romero to deposit it to my account. That same afternoon, I wrote a check for $9,800 and mailed it to the Cal Fire Benevolent Fund, the same organization now listed as 60% beneficiary in my trust restatement. It had a Fresno post office box address that I'd verified 3 times before writing it down. The charity that helped families of firefighters killed or injured in the line of duty. The place where 31 years of work ultimately pointed. Seemed right. I called Harry from the parking lot outside the post office, my older brother up in Hanford, surrounded by his beehives and his quiet routine. He'd known something was happening over the past months. I'd given him enough information to understand his name was in the trust restatement, and he'd asked a few precise questions, and then not pressed for more, which was exactly the right response from exactly the right person. Come up to Fresno on Saturday, I said. Bring coffee. I've got something to show you. Harry pulled up to Thesta Street on Saturday morning with 2 cups from a place in Hanford he'd been going to since 1991. 72 years old, moving slower than he used to, same steady expression he'd had his entire life. He looked at the house from the driveway for a moment without saying anything. Been a while, he said. A while, I agreed. We went to the garage. I'd spent the previous 2 weeks cleaning it out and reinstalling what needed reinstalling. The broken window was replaced. New pane, properly glazed, cost me $40 in an afternoon. The shelving restocked with what remained of the lumber blanks. The Powermatic lathe cleaned, oiled, and running. I turned it on. The garage filled with the sound of the motor settling into its rhythm. Harry stood with his coffee and watched the lathe spin. He had the look of a man who doesn't need to fill silence. After a while, he said, "Are you angry at him?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "No?" He did me a favor. Harry turned his coffee cup in his hands. What kind of favor? Reminded me whose house this was. Harry looked at the lathe, then at the walls, then at me. He nodded once, the way you nod when something is true enough to not require comment. Brenda Hunt had listed the property 2 weeks earlier at $619,000. The first open house drew 4 offers, 3 of them above asking. Brenda called to walk me through them. I told her to hold. I wasn't in a rush. A house that took 34 years to build doesn't need to sell in a weekend. Eric hadn't called since the settlement paperwork was signed. Christine hadn't called since the night I told her there was a difference between destroying a family and taking back what was yours. The grandkids were a different matter, and I held that one separately. That door wasn't closed. It was just not open yet. I picked up the maple blank I'd been setting aside since the spring. A dense, clean piece, no checks, no inclusions. I'd bought it at a turn-in supply out near Clovis 2 months ago and hadn't touched it since, waiting until I had the right room to work in. I set it on the lathe and found the center. The tool rest went into position. I picked up the bowl gouge, one of the Henry Taylor pieces I'd rolled in canvas the morning I left this house with one bag. The lathe was spinning. The tool touched the wood. Outside, the valley was doing what it always does in late October. The heat finally easing, the light going golden at 4 in the afternoon, the almond orchards north of town showing their first color. Fresno moving through another season. Harry set his coffee down and watched. The shavings fell. Everything I built was still standing. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.